Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Dunsi, and here with me today is Sharif Haji. Sharif Haji comes with over a decade of experience in policy, program design, development, and implementation. Before accepting his current role as the executive director at the Africa Center, Mr. Haji had worked with the Ministries of Seniors and Housing as well as Health for over 5 years. Prior to working with the government of Alberta, he worked in the nonprofit sector locally and internationally. Locally, he worked with Edmonton Multicultural Coalition in different capacities. Internationally, he worked with World Vision International in different countries where he led and managed major bilateral and multilateral grant-based initiatives. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Health Science and Social Services from the University of South Africa and also a Master of Public Health from the School of Public Health here at the University of Alberta. Welcome, Sharif. Thanks for joining me. I'm so glad that I'm going to be pulling from your wealth of wisdom with regards to African immigrants here in Canada. So, before we dive into the questions, tell us about yourself, what you do, and your family heritage, and how you're making a difference here in Edmonton and in Canada overall.
Thanks, Lindsay. I work at the Africa Center as the executive director. My family heritage, I come from a very beautiful country called Somalia, which is destroyed by civil war, but has the most untapped in terms of scenery, the most untapped, second longest coast on the continent. A great country with one of the best weathers in the world. Unfortunately, lack of systems and war and civil conflict had destroyed, but it's a country that is dear to my heart.
So, what brought you to Canada then, and how long have you been in Canada?
What brought me here is a family. My wife and was living here, my kids. So I joined with my family here in Canada, and then since I came, it was 2011 when I came in January. So since I came, it became home. It is not a country of birth, but it's a country of choice, which is also beautiful. Saying that I choose to be not born, but choose to be a Canadian and live in this beautiful city called Edmonton with my three kids and my lovely wife.
So, what do you miss most about home, Somalia, and what do you like about living here in Canada?
Just say I miss my mom.
I'm sure, yes.
I am the only child for my mom.
Wow.
She lives back in Somalia. My mom has she doesn't have other kids. It's very rare in Africa where you tend to have many siblings if you are a child there, or if you are a parent, you tend to have many children. But me as the only child, and she lives back home, of course, with cousins and brothers and sisters. Oh, number one, so I miss my mom. And number two, what I miss the most is, well, going around schools where I studied when I was young, playgrounds where I pushed around a soccer ball, um, the neighborhoods where I grew up, some of the traditional food that was available there, which is usually organic by naturally, I would say.
Yes.
You don't know it was organic until you come here, right? Like you see
Yes.
it wasn't organic. It was organic. You appreciate that now. So those are some of the things that that I miss the most.
And then what do you like about living in Canada?
Oh, so endless list. Well, it's a country that I made home. It's a country that um, make me feel that it made me one of its own. Um, it's a place where, although with so many challenges, it's still a place where I feel I belong. It is a place um, where I feel like I have a community, regardless of whether you come from the same background or not. It is as a society, as Edmontonian, I will say. Actually, I relate to Edmonton more. I relate to Canada, I will say.
So how long have you been in Canada or Edmonton?
I came 2011 in January, so you can think of January.
Ah, yes, winter. Oh, in
I
the
flew
peak of winter.
Yeah, I flew from Kenya, from Nairobi, which was, I think it was about plus 30, and then I landed here. It was minus 36. My life.
Minus 36.
Yeah.
I
So,
remember reading that while in Nigeria and thinking that's not possible.
yeah,
That
66
I,
degree difference. Boom.
yeah.
Yeah, so it was, what an experience it was. It was 2011, and I still remember that winter felt it had more snow than any other winters that I have seen since I came here. So
Mm.
10 years. So for 10 years, I haven't seen more snow than, maybe it was because of my first. I don't know. It just feels like there was more snow that time.
And now you're the executive director of Africa Center. So tell us about that, the history and its mandate.
The organization is basically it's the largest Black organization in Western Canada.
Mm.
Uh, it has a strong ties and connections with this beautiful city of Edmonton, but it has a provincial mandate to advance people of African descent, particular populations within our society that experiences um, different adverse implications, whether it is to do with poverty, whether it is to do with racism and the systems that we put in place, or whether it is to do with many other factors that, when they merge, become something else. Um, Disadvantage to the Black communities in this province, and particularly in the city of Edmonton. But think about it, it's a country, Canada, that goes out of its borders to get labor force,
Mhm.
whether it is temporary labor force, whether it is permanent labor, whatever it is. So it's a disadvantage to our economy to have kind of unused labor in our disposals, which becomes a burden to our system. So basically, the mandate of the organization is advancing African descent Canadians in our province. Not, it doesn't mean excluding services to others. It just means an intentional effort to be made for this particular demographics of the population.
Thank you so much. And thanks for taking that on. So,
Right.
talking more specifically, what do you think the government should be doing for newcomers to Canada? How can newcomers to Canada be better supported?
What we could do is, one, we shouldn't think uh, the explicit issues that we see. That is one thing, but there are quite a number of implicit problems that contribute to the success of new immigrants in general, but to particularly uh, new Black immigrants face a disproportionate effects. Uh, People used over and over the word of racism, and it's reaching to a level where it's not making a difference when you speak about it. But it's a reality. It, I wish I can call it something else, but I can't. What that means is that when it comes to new immigrants, there are certain things that people are able to talk and discuss about. When it comes and provide support, right? We talk about, for example, language. It's visible. We can talk about, oh, we need to do some sort of on the language. But you have people who are like Dunsi, who come from Nigeria, who speak English from birth. So it's the language is not the issue. It's the issue that you have something else. There was a study that was done in Ontario. So they looked into youth school expulsion, youth high school completion of youth, and they looked into on the lenses of race. So they used black versus the rest of the population. They had high adverse outcomes when it comes to education. But it's not only that, but it is also the they looked into the same demographics of population, but they have excluded the newness from there. So they looked second generation black children who don't have issue with language, born and raised here. They were still facing exactly the same kind of disproportionate outcome. The rates were the same. So what it tells me is that the idea that being a new immigrant is a factor, but it's not the only factor. Even if you address that, cross that line of newness and stay or born here, you still face the same problem.
Yes.
And then we do have, and I say this in many talks that I do, we do have this approach of Canada looks things into immigrants versus immigrants, meaning that we close our eyes from the rest of the issues that we face. And that's not the case. So if you exclude the immigration status from the equation and then look into other factors that are in play, issues like race, then gets kind of like blindsided when you're looking things into we're looking into immigrants versus non-immigrants. Even from the narrative perspective, I kind of find it is kind of like interesting, for lack of a better word, that we use the language of immigrants versus non-immigrants kind of approach. Post George Floyd era, we are entering a new world. The government could look into those other factors. These are the factors that makes a policeman puts his knees on the neck of somebody and makes die in front of a camera. These are the things that we see in London, Ontario, just last week, that where a family just walking, being just crashed out of them. So those are things that it's not immigration, that is not newness, that's not language barrier. These are some other reasons that the government needs to take into a serious consideration if we want to avoid this unemployment rate or higher poverty and all those kind of things. Let's put aside the lenses that we use, immigrants versus non-immigrants, and put some other lenses for us to be able to see what are some of the other determinants that contribute to the disadvantage of these populations.
Thank you. So I'm going to put a spotlight on racism. I'll read a statement before I ask my question.
Yeah.
In Canada, according to the National Collaborating Center for Determinants of Health, they state that in recent years, racism has been increasingly recognized as an important driver of inequitable health outcomes for racialized Canadians. So in light of COVID, what are your thoughts on that statement? And should Canada collect race-based data?
COVID has been COVID has been a good one of those things. I shouldn't say good thing, but what was one of those things that had revealed the cracks that we have in our systems. If you have a parent in the long-term care, you have some learnings to do from COVID. If you are somebody who used to take the bus from home to work, you have learned a lot. If you are able to if you are not able to work from home and you are at the counter, COVID has told you what's the nature of the work that you do. If you have to work in a restaurant, COVID was a new thing that revealed how the depth of your um, capacity to sustain your livelihoods. So s- that being said, what this meant was that some people had higher. There are three things from me and you. We come from public health background. There are three things that we look into, right? Like one is what is your exposure level? How are you exposed to the virus? Um, in any communicable diseases, that's what you think about. What's your level of exposure, right? And then the second thing that you think of is after exposure, what's your susceptibility? Like how susceptible you are if you get the virus, how susceptible you are, the conditions that you're living with. And then the third one is that your access to treatment, whether it is treatment or whether it is prevention services or whatever it is, like how do you access those? So COVID taught us that some of our societies do have higher exposure rates. I have the luxury to work from home. You do have the luxury to work from home. Many don't. Um, my wife works in the healthcare sector. She doesn't work from home. She has to go. Um, that means that we, the rest who are here, are at higher risk because of she's going to work. Um, the exposure is high if you have to on a counter of the store. Your exposure is higher if you are a cab driver because that's what you do for life and you have to pick people. Your exposure is higher if you are an Uber driver. Your exposure is higher if you do skip the dishes delivery. Disproportionately, a lot of those services are done by people of African descent. A lot, people of immigrant populations, particularly African descent population, have higher um, representation in those cohort of groups of people who do that type of job. So exposure rate is high. Then when it comes to susceptibility, then you're taking the bus, you're going to home, you're going to live in a crowded house, you have underlying conditions, you're susceptible. And then in terms of access, whether it is testing, has been number one tool. Vaccination, one of the best public health measures that you can think of. But imagine, like you are a cab driver, so you don't have, if any day that you take off from your desk is a lost economy. Any time that you take off from the work that you do at the counter, a lost economy or a lost income for your family. So it's kind of like sacrificing that and then continue. So on the basis of those, that there has been higher uh, disproportionate number of cases in neighborhoods of Black population. We only know that because of the neighborhood data. I've been asking the government. I've written to the Minister Chandra. I have written to Chief Medical Officer here. I have written to the Premier asking the importance of race-based data. In fact, some of the provinces, like BC, they were looking at it from human rights perspective. If certain populations are at risk, you need to collect data that's based on race because of it, some people are disproportionately being impacted. So we have been requesting that information. What I know is that there has been some information that's collected, but for some odd reasons that I don't understand, that the government still doesn't want to share that, the race-based data information that has been collected. The fact that the government doesn't want to share tells me that, well, it has data that will have that will cause some outcry for certain populations. So it's better not to share. Is it a good measure from a public health perspective? No, at all. Um, if we collect information and then intervene that, it would have been the most efficient way to deal with. You could narrow your information, whether it's information dissemination. Your intervention can be narrowed to certain groups if they have high rates of the cases. In short, um, it's very critical. It's a critical public health measure. Like, I don't understand if there is epidemic or pandemic, and you know there are certain groups that have high rates, and you don't want to collect that information and then intervene. I just don't understand the reasons behind that. So it is a very critical public health measure that is a lost opportunity that we could have used not only this time but the future pandemics that comes. But the positive note is that there are other institutions, if you step outside of health, that are looking into. I was sitting on to the Equity Advisory Council of the Edmonton Public Schools, and they are looking into collection of race-based data or demographic or disaggregated data to show that in terms of disproportionate certain groups of some benchmarks, whether it is suspension rates, completion rates, dismissal rates, and all those kind of things. Well, I am taking long to answer your question because of it's really, really important question, and is very loaded question. There will be a time where we will be saying that we should have collected that, and I will leave it there. There will be a time that we will look back and say that we should have collected that information.
I'm hoping that there will come a time when we'll collect race-based data in Canada. That is essential. We need to highlight the problem areas before we can even start to talk about solution.
Yeah.
So if we don't know what the problem areas are, if we don't have evidence to justify or demonstrate those, how can we then talk about solutions?
Yeah,
And that's why
at national level, I should say this. At national level, the Prime Minister Trudeau's government has done some good work, I will say. It's a starting point. They have done a good start in terms of the language that they have been using when it comes to race issues. And also, Start Canada started collection of employment rates on race-based data. Start Canada has been looking into some of the, whether it is economic data based on race, to address some of the systemic barriers that certain populations face. And there is a talk that collection of number of variables of demographics that includes race through Start Canada. So I think there is the narrative shifted. I can see there are good signs from the national level, but I believe that there is a room for improvement at national level, but at the provincial level, there is a lot that we need to do.
So now let's climb the summit of multiculturalism in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I am drawn to the notion and principles of multiculturalism because I find that the thought of diverse cultures coexisting together is a wonderful thing. But in many organizations in Canada, especially at the top levels, the principle of multiculturalism is not reflected. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'll still go back to the US. How come we it's our neighbors? We always compare ourselves to the US, and there are a few things that I will say United States does well, which is the recognition of different races and their status on that. when I'm saying the status of that is that they have a stronger information about what the role of race or the role race plays in their society and how it impacts. The notion of multiculturalism in Canadian multiculturalism is one of the best, to be honest.
Yes, I believe that.
Yeah, in the world, um, it's globally it is viewed as a good example where people can coexist and build a society together. But there is like there are some learnings that we also need to get from Canadian multiculturalism. The way the Canadian Multiculturalism Act was defined and how the principles that guide that act and where we are today, there is a room so for improvement. So what that means is that the overt racism is one thing that Canadians will not accept, and if there is any government that doesn't take an action on that, I can definitely tell you they will lose to be in power.
Mhm.
So no government will accept sitting back when it comes to overt racism. But the thing is that the problem that we have is that we have a systemic one that is very hard to become a newsworthy. So, for example, if a, if the prime minister put committee together and you have the way it's approached and it's not diverse enough, it won't be that newsworthy. It's not overt. We don't see the implications that it has, but if it impacts quickly to people's lives, Canadians will react to that. So the systemic racism in the country is also makes it also difficult to pinpoint and so that you could address. So it's challenging, but what we see is if you want to see on systems based racism, is you look into the society and then measure the outcome of the system. Like any system, if you have any system that you have, you look into that. Okay, what is the output of this system? Is it producing equitable outcome? If the answer is no, you have a problem. So let's just use that as an example. So in Canada, use Edmonton. It's close home. We can relate to it, and then we could use some of the data start Canada and tell us that. So in Edmonton alone, um, the education between Black and non-Black population is the same. So in other words, you have 26 or 27% of the population having bachelor's degree. So or above. If you take that into the labor world, you expect the same result.
Mhm.
But it's not.
No.
A good example is that the Black populations have twice unemployment rate
Mhm.
when the education level is the same.
Mhm.
Then if you take the next step because of your employment leads to your income, even those who get jobs, then you're looking into an income gap of over 20,000 a year
Yep.
between Black populations versus the rest. And then what does that mean? That means that you will have high poverty rates. And then, and the worst part of poverty is that when you have children living in low income situations, like if it's adults, it's bad. I'm not saying that, but it's worse when you have children there. So a good example is that 1 in 10 of the Black children live in low income situation. 1 in 10 of the general population, children live in low income situation. It's It's 3 in 10 for the Black children. So it's 3 times high.
Mm.
So these are the production of our system.
Yeah.
Then you can ask and then say that is the multiculturalism from a systemic perspective is addressing the racism that produce like potential outcomes. So there is a lot that we could do. The good thing as of last year is that the prime minister recognizes that says that we have a prime minister that says that we Canadian we have a systemic racism. We have in our city we have well I haven't heard from the provincial government, but in our city we have city council members who say that well our system has contributed to the systemic racism outcomes. So there is recognition, and I think it's a good start. We should we shouldn't pretend that that nothing was done. Yes, we talked about we do anything not yet, but I think discussing and talking about it is a good starting point.
Yes.
Hopefully that it's not because of the Black Lives Matter movement, and then after that it fades out, and then nothing is done. I hope so. I hope
Or Black History Month.
yeah, or
Just
Black History Month, and it's a period of time, and then
say
that's
here.
all done. I hope that's not the case. I hope there is a talk about it, and I hope there will be actions that are incorporated in our systems. So we can do a lot. People of African descent, of Black populations, are part of the society. We have the knowledge, the kind of anything that like they bring the same value with any other person. Well, it happened to be they used to be enslaved, but that's not the case today. So we should be thinking of what are some of the things that like whenever we are building our system, we should be thinking from that perspective. We still have a society where when we are putting together a committee for our systems, we don't diversify enough. When we are putting an anti-racism committee, we diversify them. Oh, this is anti-racism committee. You need to have different people here. So until we reach that level that it is in every committee or structures that we build, we need to diversify to bring those different perspectives. We have we will not be able to address the systemic racism. So well, it's a good starting, but we are not on the finish line.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So on that note, have you ever experienced racism on a personal level? And what was that like? And what did you do?
It's difficult. Like I don't think any Black person will say no, I haven't.
We've all experienced it.
And it's a bad thing. Like it's an unfortunate thing that we feel like we experienced and we are used to and we can live with it. It's a bad thing to say, right? But I can't help it feels that way. It feels that way. It feels like yeah, it's not something that you can say, oh, that happened to me today. I wouldn't say that. It's kind of like if you are conditioned to it, you don't feel it. Yeah. I'm not too sure if I'm answering your question, but what it is look like, I think I can't tell. I can't say, I can't pinpoint this is what it means.
That's a fair answer. We cannot, like you said, deny the fact that Black people contend with some of these things on a daily, constant basis.
Yeah.
And so that's why I end my questions with this self-care. What do you do for self-care? Especially knowing that you are actually, as the executive director of Africa Center, you're in the middle of this. Apart from your own personal challenges, you carry other people's personal challenges. So how do you take care of yourself?
Well, I do share my challenges. I do share my frustrations with people. I think that helps. I have wonderful family that is very supportive of the work that I do. They knew when I was coming to. It's a source of relief for me. they see my day-to-day work and life, and basically spending the time with them, and timing with the friends that I could chat with them on issues that we as a society face. Um, yeah, that is one thing, and the second thing is regardless of how scary it could be, sometimes like what happened last week in London, Ontario, but I still do my evening walks.
Yes. Yes, we all do.
Whenever there is a nice weather, make use
Oh,
of it.
yes. As opposed to now, it's raining and there's
Yeah, now we
thunderstorm.
can do it. Right? And when it's raining, do things like this.
Exactly. Yeah. You stay indoors and do this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time, Sharif.
Thank you for having me, and was a good conversation. I really enjoyed.
Thank you.
And thanks for doing this. Thanks for starting this and doing this. If I will be tapping to some people's shoulders and say that you should talk to Dunsi.